everyone. It's really great to have you. I'm going to get started, it being 7:30 here in Palo Alto. Welcome and thank you for joining us. This is a kind of a participation and feedback session in the spirit of the people-centered internet. I'm actually going to forego introductions for everyone. Most people know each other, but what we're going to do today is talk about the topic of digital regulation. I think most of you know that it's been really in the news, particularly with the concerns about AI that are coming up. And there's been announcements from the White House, from the UN, and we have been actually thinking about the topic of digital regulation since 2019 at People-Centered Internet. How that happened was we were at WSIS, the World Summit on the Information Society, and PCI was invited to facilitate the panel, high-level panel with ministers of ICT and telecom regulators and other representatives of international organizations on the topic of digital regulation. And following that panel, it really became clear to me that there was a need for much more collaboration and coordination on digital regulation. And I've been working on that topic and with the People-Centered Internet, different people within the community. So we've now hit a very big topic, and we've proposed a series of panels at the UN Science Summit, which will be next month. And so what I'd like to do is basically let you know the panels that we're doing, and there are 8 different sections of the workshops over 2.5 days. I'd like to spend 5 minutes on each workshop where I show you the abstract for the workshop, and then I'd like to get your comments and suggestions for speakers or other topics that are not covered in the abstract as it currently is described. So that's the plan for today. You received 2-page documents giving some background on our position at the People-Centered Internet, where we're really saying that digital regulation should be of the people, by the people, and for the people. That should not be a surprise to any of you. But we're saying that we need to rethink digital regulation so that it's not top-down, that the digital transformations that are now underway in almost every country in the world should involve the people. And these workshops are a way to actually get this story out, but also to see what other people think. And the consultation process begins with this session. So does anybody have any questions before we begin? If not, I'd like to suggest a format for participation. One is, if you have a suggestion for a speaker or a moderator, please put the name in the chat. And Schneider Alfonso, who's our operations lead here at PCI, will follow up with you to get the email information and so on. You don't have to put that email in the chat. So we have various people we're thinking of, but we actually have not invited anyone yet because we wanted to have this consultation process first. The other thing is I'll be showing the abstract so you can read it, and then you can post your comments or suggestions in the chat, or just raise your hand, and then in the 5 minutes that we have, we'll just have that exchange. We should be able to finish with 15 minutes for open discussion, and if anybody wants to stay on, I'm available until for another 45 minutes. So that's the format. the actual meeting is just 1 hour, and we're going to go through this pretty fast. Is everyone okay with that? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, I'm going to share screen. Trying to get to the point where I can actually show the slides. Okay. So thank you, Steve Crocker, for being here. Steve Crocker is the person who invented requests for comments. So in a tip of the hat to you, Steve, requests for feedback. What we're going to be doing at the Science Summit, which is held as a side event to the UN General Assembly, is it will run from, I think, September 12th to the 29th. And we will be having 2.5 days of panels from September 20th to the 22nd. These are the panels that I want to talk about. And then on the 22nd, we will announce remind everybody about the 50th anniversary of the internet. But this session today is not about the 50th anniversary. This session is about the panels. So our panels are going to address 6 key challenges and objectives for, in fact, our DCD topic: digital cooperation, governance, and regulation. And this is the first panel, which will begin on the morning of September 20th. I will actually start at 9 o'clock, make introductions somewhat like I'm doing now. And then this is the first panel, doing people-centered science and the role of data cooperatives. This was a paper that was written for the German G7. It was selected as one of the Think 7 policy briefs that was given to Olaf Scholz. So the topic is not so much new, but it has not been taken out to a wider audience. And the format that we're taking is how do we do data collaboration in science? And we're proposing the approach of data collaboratives or cooperatives. So any comments on this? We have 5 minutes for discussion.
So yeah, this is Alex. This is a great topic that I know a few people, including myself, but I know other people that are very much interested in discussing intercooperability. I know that we talk a lot about interoperability, but we don't talk about intercooperability. And there are a lot of, I want to say, new technologies that are out there that are worth mentioning, exploring, sensitizing, and socializing it to the audience that usually is unfamiliar, or if they are familiar, maybe don't have the same thoughts of the role of self-sovereign identity, the role of self-sovereign data, the role of valuation of that data, and how that data can be quantified, containerized, quantified, and afterwards exchanged or traded, if you wish, for lack of a better economic terminologies. So I think it's a fantastic topic. And, from my end, being a physician in healthcare, that is a prime example of why this type of approach, without going too far about data escrows and data unions and data, as a dignified labor, which is kind of going really to that end, could be extremely interesting. I'll be glad to propose a couple of serious names of individuals that would speak to that, but it's a great topic.
Thank you, Alex. Appreciate all the comments. If there are specific people and especially papers that you'd like us to make sure we know about when we put up the information about the panel, we can link to those things. So go ahead and put them in the chat. And does anybody else have their hand up? Because I can't see. I've asked Schneider to help identify people. Lynn, go ahead.
So I'm working on a paper that actually has to do with the evolution of the law of the sea and its applicability to cyber elements. And one of the interesting things that's coming out of the law of the sea is this concept of the common heritage of mankind. And within it, there are two different groupings, global public goods and global public resources. And the global public resource and the common heritage definition needs an organization, if you will, to adjudicate the allocation of resources, like the Seabed Authority in Jamaica. But the global public good can be handled in a very distributed approach. And one of the things that was cited in the paper was the transition of ICANN from basically U.S. control to a much more distributed sort of control, as an example of what future collaborative digital collaboration could look like without having to go through a transnational, trans-state entity. So I'm just wondering if that might play a role in this also. Over.
Thank you, Lynn. I wish I could answer, but I'm not going to. There's so much I want to say. We're just going to keep on getting feedback. Kevin, please.
I mean, Lynn, just quickly, in this regard, and data cooperatives, Choice Flows has a technology and a methodology called Choice Flows Federated Insights. And what it is, it's agent-based that embeds an agent into the data sets so that you're only pulling the coefficients off of the data and sending it to a master model for understanding. It's good for regulated and sensitive data sets like health data. So I just suggest that you might want to take a look at that as one approach for looking at this, as opposed to trying to pool and anonymize, right? Which has a lot of drawbacks. So I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you. Pablo?
You're welcome.
Pablo,
Yeah,
please go ahead.
I just wanted to look at it from kind of the other end, along with how do we build it better and more secure? How do we protect against some of the abuses of the past? So how do we enable the data cooperative seems to suggest that everybody gets an equal vote in how it's being used. And I think as individual, we can say that that is not currently the case. And as well as big tech in particular has used their massive troves of data to do experimentation on their quote unquote customers without running through any sort of IRB. So I think discussing about the things that are currently abhorrent and yet standard practice needs to be part of this discussion.
Yep. IRB for other people, it's if you have human subjects, you have to go through a whole lot of how are you handling human subjects, but we don't do any of that for digital. We're moving on to the next panel because so here's the next panel. Sorry. Can you all read it? I'm having trouble seeing it myself. Okay. People-centered approach to developing digital regulation. So the issue of global versus local. Essentially, the only main groups doing digital regulation are the EU and the US. And the Kenyan ambassador, I think, at the EU spoke up. Different countries are speaking up about this as a problem. So how do we bridge all these silos?
Hey, Maylin, this is John Wharton.
Yes.
What I think, living in this world of science and technology and all these areas here, I think, when you see the word regulation, you tend to be very prescriptive versus descriptive. Meaning, how much, what is the purpose at the higher level? Is it to provide a framework, guidance, some thoughts or framing principles around people-centered internet and what people-centered internet does, versus descriptive of a technology or a regulation? So, and do we have the authority to establish a regulation versus give some guidance or some principles? So I'm just looking at the nouns and the adjectives here and what they mean and what is in our ability to execute. So again, no comment needed from you, but I just get concerned when we talk about prescriptive versus descriptive for a body that we're talking about, and what are organizing principles, some thoughts on guidelines and things of that nature, and maybe setting standards or to migrate to versus coming right out regulation. So that's my thought. So no need to comment. Just wanted to pass that on.
Thank you, John. Anyone else? I don't see any hands, so.
Well,
Please.
actually, this is Diane. I just want to echo John's comments, because I think one of the things that I agree with everything he said on the language and also on guiding principles. I think it's something that PCI can really offer to the world, even if we just start with a very basic framework and then continue to build out the framework based on best practices that we learn and that others experience and report on.
Thank you, Diane. Bill?
Hi, Maylin. Just representing Canada the best I can on this, but I do think that to your problem statement, there are different initiatives being undertaken by each country. So Canada has its AI Data Act that it's put forth, and it's part of the Global Partnership on AI, which does have some frameworks. So maybe the fine tuning of the problem set, I think what you're really saying is that the environment is tilting very deliberately in one or two directions. And the question might be, how do you use some of the existing or maybe new sort of platforms to allow other and more robust cooperation from other countries who in and of themselves are probably doing stuff along this front. Wasn't sure that was entirely sort of expressed in the problem statement, but I think that's your intention. So I think this is a very important topic. Thanks, man.
Thank you. Justin?
Hi, Maylin. So I wanted to respond to some of the comments that have been made, especially John Wharton's, because I think the frameworks versus the regulations per se, in terms of the descriptive versus prescriptive, is a lot of what we're up to in the DataSphere initiative, in the work that I'm doing leading our Africa Forum on Sandboxes for Data and our global Sandboxes Forum, in terms of thinking about how to bring people together to find the solutions that work for those contexts and the environments that are resonant with the values and the specific circumstances of these countries and then their needs in the digital space and the development of their digital economies. So I'm really excited about this panel. I will be on a plane to New York.
So Justin, can we just keep going? I just want input. Okay, Declan, sure. Please.
Just want to highlight, as I've done before, the need to be specific when we talk about broadly regulation. And I would just like to point out that the European Union is advancing AI regulation as we speak, and there's no developing nation or African input to that process. Thank you, Maylin.
Thank you. If there are no other comments, we're moving on to the next panel. And please raise your hand if you do have comments. So. This was the topic of a paper that we wrote, People-Centered Internet. We led this paper for the Japan G7. We were given the topic, People-Centered Science and Digital Transformation, and we provided a practical approach for the G7 and G20 this content here is basically the abstract of that paper. Comments, if any, and suggestions of speakers and papers, please put in the chat. It's a lot to read, I know. I'm not going to call on anyone. If you actually want to say something, please put up your hand. Shall we move on to the next panel? Okay. I'm sorry, I read very quickly, so if people are still reading, let me know. Okay, so this is the next panel. We wanted to actually have voices from especially Africa, Latin America, Asia, and to have people who could speak about what they see their priorities are. We want, so here's this panel. If you have suggestions of somebody who could speak or who should speak, let me know.
Maylene, I'll send you a couple of folks that I know in Africa that are running large centers, AI Center of Excellence and the AI IoT Center and things of that sort, and they're dealing also with all the, I want to say, regulatory sandboxes and how do they interface with the community at large and basically trailblaze or create that landscape, because in most places there are no serious incumbents, so they turn out to be the advisors. They go to the government and say, I want to talk to the advisor about whatever, and they say, how about you be it, and say fine. So I think that there's some very interesting possibilities there.
Great. Who was speaking? I'm sorry, I cannot even see.
Alex, this was Alex.
Alex, okay, very good. Thank you, Alex. Astrid, did you want to say something?
No, that's fine. I just put my comments in the chat.
Okay. Great. We'll move on to the next one. So this one, please read. How can we use technology to help us with governance? And we've inherited regulation from a pre-digital era. What could we think of as ways that technology could actually make regulations serve the people and the perspectives and priorities in each country, and in regional collaboration on regulation?
Hi, Milan. It's Marcy. I don't know how much you want to incorporate other work on civic engagement, public engagement, and other, innovative ways that's happening in different places. But I can help brainstorm some people on that.
Great. Thank you. Marcy, if you would just be so kind as to say that in the chat also, just so that I can make sure that I remember.
Will do.
Thanks. Anyone else on this topic?
Melin, it's Gurvinder. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Govinda.
Good to be back. I can mesh with you a little bit more offline if it's interesting. I'd like to see if we can have thinking around, new and modern incentive mechanisms, digital assets, and tokenization to serve new models of governance. So that's kind of one. And related to that, that's a little bit from the technology dimension, but also from the economic dimension related to that is if we can weave in kind of the notion of institutional economics, which also lends towards new models of governance. So if that's an interesting area, then in fact, it's a deep area of my work. Then we can kind of mind meld separately on that, Milan.
Thank you, Govinda. You said institutional economics. Is that
Correct.
right? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Anyone else on this panel input? We'll go on to the next one.
My name is Joseph speaking.
Yes.
We have this, we have both Nima Lugangira as a representative of the parliamentarians. And we also have, what's the name? The leader of the UCSAF, the Universal Communication Service Access Fund. Well, I'll give you the name separately.
Right.
Which is the development fund in the Universal Service Access Fund in Tanzania. It's also a lady, and she has really shown how to change. Justina Mashiba. Let's see.
Thank you. Thank you, Yusuf. Any other comments about this? This is the last panel, and then there'll be the keynotes next. For this one, we'd like to identify people ahead of time so that they won't be left with only self-identified people. But essentially, we're looking for input on people who could speak about this. Okay. So then this last is just a stock taking of what has happened over the last 2 days. So if anybody knows particularly good people who are rapporteurs or able to kind of help with the stock taking, really appreciate your recommendations. Then we'll close, and then I'll just say a little bit about what's going to happen on September 22nd. This is Eastern time in New York City. So we're going to talk about the 50th anniversary of the internet and how it offers a chance to take a pause to look about what do we want for the next 50 years. So now I think I'm going to stop sharing so that we can just have a discussion. We got through this very fast. Really welcome your comments, and there's a paper that I and Yasha Stein are writing for the IEEE journal called Bridge, and that will come out October 1st. So this whole topic will be out in the air. I see Vint is here. Vint will be one of the keynote speakers on September 22nd. And we're very glad to have him as our founding chair of People-Centered Internet.
So, Maylin, do you have a list of other speakers that have committed to this event, or is that, or even just a list of topics that are already planned, or is this meeting intended?
Karen.
So I've just gone through the different panels that.
Oh, okay. I'm joining.
This is Vint Cerf, who's one of the fathers of the internet, right? Who I've been friends with him, but he's.
So, Vinta, I will get you we've just been going through all the panels, and I was trying to get input about suggestions for speakers. We do have, in fact, identified speakers, but I wanted to have it an open box for this discussion for people to propose them.
Okay, no problem. Apparently I must be joining late because I had other meetings that went until 11 o'clock Eastern. So I'm just joining. Sorry about that.
That's all right. That's all right. I think maybe because I'd like to do it, we'll have a recap of what we've just all gone through, and this way also Vint can catch up. Okay, so we were talking about the feedback. This is 2.5 days that PCI is organizing at the UN Science Summit, and we're talking about key challenges and objectives of digital cooperation. The first panel is on the role of data cooperatives in people-centered science. And you'll see this common format for all the panels that we say, you know, what are we talking about? What's the problem? And what is the approach?
Mm-hmm.
Then this next one, people-centered approach to developing digital regulation. Then we have digital and the SDGs. How do we get the data together in order to help to achieve the SDGs and apply our strongest tools and most capable tools to apply to reach the SDGs? Then this panel is about the concept of a digital regulation sandbox. In fact, 70 countries in the world have already tried this. There are 14 African countries that have these sandboxes. The country that I was born in, Singapore, has done one of the most comprehensive sandboxes. And they talk about it at an annual event called the Singapore FinTech Festival. And last year there were 62,000 people with from 115 countries there. So this is not a peripheral topic. This is right in the center of what lots of countries are looking at. Then how can tech help with regional digital regulation sandboxes? What technologies are out there that could make this possible? At the beginning of this session, I actually talked about how I was the facilitator, the high-level panel facilitator nominated by the IEEE for the session on enabling environment. And this is where the topic of regional digital regulation sandboxes was first raised in 2019. And what the different ministers and telecom regulators said was every time they had an election, all the work of setting up the sandbox would disappear. And he made this gesture, which I always remember. He said it would disappear. And then they'd have to start again with the new president, new prime minister. And there was a call for the ITU to set up regional digital regulation sandboxes. So it could be a sovereign commitment by the country to keep going on the sandbox in conjunction with other countries in the region. Say, for example, the Caribbean could be doing a sandbox together, a network of sandboxes. So that was the proposal, and it's documented at WSIS from 2019. And what Peaceful Centered Internet has been doing ever since has been to try to bring that forward. Vint, you have a, please.
Yeah, I'm thinking whether the sandbox notion, regulatory sandbox notion, bears any resemblance to, for example, special economic zones, where rules are set that are different from the norm for purposes of figuring out whether those different rules make a difference from the economic point of view, or in some other case from regulatory point of view. So should I think of a sandbox as being similar in scope or in style to the economic zones that are sometimes set up? Sometimes taxation is different in order.
Yes.
This is like an A/B test in a way.
It really is a lab. It's to try things that the rest of the country or are not in a very specific way. The participants in the sandbox can do things where the regulations are relaxed in order to try to see what might work. The special economic zone helps to relax it in a geographic part of the country where the rest of the country, in fact, will never have those. But I think for digital regulation sandboxes, this is a test to see what might work for the whole country later on after it's been sort of QA quality controlled.
That's a little bit like the long-term American experiment with the internet, which was not regulated or essentially unregulated for a decade or more, partly because the legislators didn't want to prematurely kill the potential of this new technology.
Thanks exactly for bringing that up, Vint, because that's what we're trying to do, to let the spirit of how the original internet came about and bring it to apply in this difficult time so that each country can do it in a more systematic way and learn from each other. So I'm just going to the next one, gender issues. I will say a few words about this. I was one of the co-chairs for this year's UN Commission on the Status of Women, which is the first time they took up the theme of digital innovation. The issues related, especially to AI, are frightening because the AIs have been trained on data where there is tremendous amount of bias in the data as it's been collected up to now due to the lack of participation by women. And so, in fact, an AI future could really mean that women have to fight against the machines in order to get our voices heard. And so there's a lot of issues, but that's just one example of the issues related to AI. People who speak languages other than English, AI is not being trained on those languages. People who are in cultures that are not written about on the internet, AIs are not trained on those cultures. So this is the tip of the iceberg of some of the issues related to artificial intelligence. And there's many other. This one is Please, Finn, go ahead.
I'm just thinking a little bit about that one, and although it's focused on gender issues, the general form of the problem is lack of representation from various and sundry parties, however you choose to classify them. So we might want to make sure that even though I understand you want to emphasize the gender element, we should make sure people recognize that this problem shows up in a lot of other categories, and that our problem, of course, is to achieve adequate representation of these various perspectives.
Absolutely. I cannot resist a fact. There are thousands of African languages that are going extinct because the fonts are not shown on the in the digital world. So the young people don't want to learn it because they can't type it anymore. So this one is just getting lots of people to talk about what has all gone after. And so that's, and then Vint, you'll be the opening keynote for this. So I'm stopping sharing now. You just came in right at the end. Open discussion, thoughts?
Well, first thing would be the usual question we all ask ourselves is how would a success be characterized for this event? Who do you want to move? What outcome do you want to have? Have you given some thought to that? Maybe you could articulate that a little bit.
I will, and I just want to say cone of silence on this for the people who are here. We believe that the call for the ITU to set up regional digital cross-sector sandboxes that was made in 2019 at the panel that I facilitated is a very important and worthy call. And so we are working to develop a program proposal for the ITU and to work with the ITU, in fact, to get member states to support an approach to digital cross-sector regulation at the regional level so that it's collaborative, but also participative inside each country so that ordinary people can provide feedback. One of the factors that we're saying is that with conversational AI, we can in fact involve many, many more people in participating and providing feedback in a sandbox than we've ever been able to do. So some of this work in putting this 2.5 days together is to get broad multi-stakeholder input on these concepts so that as we move forward with the ITU, we can in fact say that we have put the idea forward and we're getting input and ideas to incorporate into that. Bill.
So do you have, just thinking a little bit more about the mechanics of all this, if you set up a sandbox, obviously there have to be some categorization of the rules of the sandbox, so somebody has to document that. Presumably, after having done that, now somebody has to monitor whether or not the rules are being followed, because any outcomes that aren't within the rule set will pollute the conclusion that you might want to reach based on the rules that you thought you were adopting. Has there been any discussion already on implementation?
Yes, in fact, 70 countries have implemented some version of the sandbox. 14 African countries have implemented. Singapore has done one of the most comprehensive implementations. And I had mentioned this earlier, every year Singapore actually showcases what happened in the sandbox. And last year, 62,000 people came from 115 countries to look at this sort of experiment on a sandbox for digital regulation. So yes, and I've just put in the chat digitalregulation.org, which documents the findings of the World Bank and the ITU in their work with 12 different countries. There's a whole series of publications on this. This is continuing work that the ITU calls 5th generation collaborative regulation. So what we're proposing is now moving forward on the first 5 generations that the ITU has already been doing on digital regulation. Let me move to Bill Tam, who has his hand raised.
Thanks, Maylin. And steady back for a moment on all the topics that you've got on the panels and the keynote. I think it's a very comprehensive set of discussions that you're going to be undertaking. One of the things that drew me to this group and the work that you were doing, Maylin, was the very sort of baseline of trying to promote a lot of the human rights attributes that the UN was having that sort of assurance that in the digital framework we could not only ensure the continuity of human rights, but also create the pathway to really make it even more robust. And so contextually, one of the things that we've been working on in Canada, and I think it's maybe not fully reflected in the panel discussions here, so I'm just wondering how to do that, is that we are trying to set out a framework that understands that AI and data regulations need to support the tenets, the core tenets of human rights, but also to kind of safeguard against potential harms. And so that's sort of the balance. And in that context, there's both the, what are you trying to prevent, as well as what are the things that you're trying to promote. And what we've been wrestling with this idea of how do you characterize things that are high risk activities. And I'm not sure that we've got that right yet, but the concept there is that we want to understand areas where we need to pay more attention. And they could be in areas where we know that there's going to be natural biases that have adverse impacts on particular segments of the population, or may have impacts on human health, or may have societal impacts that are much broader. And so the topic that I don't see in the panels, and maybe it should be incorporated in one of them, is this idea of sort of a harmonization effort, or at least it may be in the context of sandboxes, but this idea that there are some commonalities across regions and countries in looking at, well, what are the things that we really need to all pay attention to, or at least create the forums necessary to say, we may have our own sort of set of starting principles because we all have variations of our human rights legislations, but there may be some things that we want to conjure up that are truly at an international cooperation scale, that we have sort of quicker pathways to taking action to safeguard against those, or on the inverse, things that we want to invest in that actually promote certain things that we want to see more of. Thanks, Maylin.
Very good point, Bill. Thank you. Bill Tam and I met. He is heading the Canadian Super Cluster on Digital. Anyone else?
There are a number of comments in the chat. I don't know if you've been monitoring those.
Yeah, I wanted to, I asked for all the people to put their things in the chat so that I could monitor it later. But if anybody does want to say something, please put up your hand.
Maylin, this is Diane. Is there going to be one or two main people-centered messages that for the panels you're leading, involved in, or contributing to the organization of, we can ensure are weaved in? So there's a consistent message, at least 50% of the time, if it's 100, great, that we do get across.
Thank you. Very good guidance. Thank you, Diane. We're at the beginning of all of this, so thanks for. I mean, we certainly are doing this because we want an outcome, which is a more people-centered approach to digital regulation. while we have an idea about how to start and we actually have quite specific implementation, we want to hear what other people can tell us that we don't know within ourselves. So while we do want to shape the messaging to some extent, we actually truly are looking for multi-stakeholder consultation. And we see this in other events that we run as a way to get that. Vint, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I'm glad you mentioned multi-stakeholder input, because that's, of course, one of the key things that's missing from some of the UN initiatives. In particular, I just got off of a call with the IGF leadership panel, and we heard from the Tech Envoy's office that the plans for evolving the digital, global digital compact ultimately would devolve into a multilateral but not a multi-stakeholder negotiation. And so unsurprisingly, the UN view is that ultimately it's the states that are responsible for making decisions. While that's probably inescapable in a Westphalian world, it's not 100% clear whether the consultations that are undertaken in the context of this digital cooperation idea are more than input that doesn't necessarily end up going anywhere. I don't mean to prejudge any of this, and it could very well be that the consultations actually have a material effect on that which is negotiated. But you might want to find a way to draw a distinction between the sandbox idea and the way in which the sandboxes are created and managed, to distinguish that from the purely nation state perspective.
Yes, I think it's a very, very key point. Declan.
Just to state something blindingly obvious, the UN is not a regulator. And I think we need to understand and reflect on this. And that's why I think that the initiatives that Mei Ling is putting forward is so important, because how do you do global regulation? I don't think there's an answer to that now, but it certainly won't come from the UN because, as Vint has just pointed out, that's left to member states. Member states don't want the UN involved in regulations, or certainly not regulating digital anything, which is why in my earlier comment I referred to the, if you like, the test case or an example in front of us, which is the European Union AI regulation, and that may provide a process to experiment in how to do this regulation. And the point I would just finally make is that the AI regulation will come with extraterritorial applicability, which to you and me means it applies everywhere, but everybody has not been consulted. Thank you, Mei Ling.
I think Declan said it in reference to an earlier context: no regulation without representation.
Absolutely, Mei Ling. And I think this is, sorry if I could just make a final comment, is that the world we inhabited 50 years ago was one where, you know, regulators regulated and that was the end of it. Today we are beginning to understand that the world is not that simple, and the regulations being advanced by maybe 15% of the global population no longer can dictate terms for the rest of the global population. And this is where we're at. And the representation is not being made. The representation is not there, neither at the level of the UN nor. And if you look at the submissions into the Digital Global Compact process, they're online. It's the usual suspects. There have been no submissions by recognizable less developed nation entities at any level. Thank you, Malin.
Thank you. So just for those who are not aware of some of the references, next year the UN will run the Summit of the Future as part of the UN General Assembly alongside it in September of 2024. At that summit, the Global Digital Compact will be signed. The Global Digital Compact is being developed and many people are providing input to it. There's a whole consultation process that's happening, but as it's all the usual people who speak to the UN that are giving the input, that we're not hearing from fishermen and farmers. We're not hearing from grandmothers. We're not talking to people whose lives are going to be tremendously affected by digital. And so we within the People-Centered Internet are proposing that there are ways to use technology to in fact consult with the people, to get their input and to incorporate it in what we do going forward, not just within a country, but between countries. So please, this is an open discussion, and does anybody else want to say something?
It's Vin again. Malin, I think you must be familiar with this, I never get the name right, this group that has been setting up polls on these topics and other topics in the public. So it's been an attempt at getting sort of man on the street input, and they're using a deliberative process where the problem is introduced to a group of people that are selected to be broadly representative of the general population. The problem is explained and described, some of the issues are described, then there's discussion, and then they poll again to find out whether or not there's a change in perspective by that theoretically representative group. I wonder whether their work is relevant to what you're trying to do, and should they be, if they are not already engaged, should they be?
I'm sure it's relevant. And they're just here at Stanford, across the street. There's a whole deliberative democracy initiative at Stanford also. And I myself have participated in open budgeting, San Jose and different cities around the Bay Area and beyond have done participative budgeting for city councils. There are many things that are going on that actually the discussion in the UN is just not aware of. And that's one of the reasons that we're bringing this topic to the fore, that digital regulation is not just about regulating digital, but how do you use digital to actually have regulation that serves the people better. And we believe it's possible to think about new ways of doing surveying, new ways of getting input from people who don't read or write, by using voice, by using the phone, and we can get open-ended answers and still be able to work with them and use AI to help us, but also going all the way back to the actual source for where the particular idea came from, is an important part of what we're proposing.
So I just did a quick check. It's Mission Publique is the organization, and Antoine Vernier is the lead. I'll put that.
Thank you. Yes, you introduced him to me, and yes, I need to get back to Antoine. Yes. In fact, we met at Mrs. 2 years ago or something. Thank you, everyone. We've reached the end of the hour. If anyone wants to stay on, I'm here. But we appreciate your time. And thank you very much for the input. And of course, I'm very open to your input for later. And please just write to me or set up a call. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, Malin, I'll just stay for a moment to slip in a thought with you.
Yes, please.
You know, it might be worth considering a spectrum on this notion of, you know, regulation through representation, whichever way you use the soundbite. I think the challenge is around the fact of representation and how do we scale it. So I think if we consider and outline a spectrum of those choices of representation, where at the simplest level, it's like you're going to the San Jose City Council, right? At the other end of the spectrum would be where an algorithm represents me and I authorize the algorithm to represent me. And in between, where
Go ahead.
where I have an identity and an algorithm to represent my representation, and I authorize for it to do so, right? That's kind of the more sophisticated extreme of that spectrum. And in between, we are already seeing platforms, one that I know and associate with in Australia called Vote for Earth, directed more towards climate control. In fact, a few of us will also be at the Science Summit speaking. So in between those two ends of the spectrum, there seems to be, you know, these grassroots efforts where digital democracy kind of, you know, the whole digital government, digital democracy participants could be there. Governments are very focused on getting an identity like what Aadhaar has done, and that's been spoken about in this forum extensively. But that's only the beginning. And in fact, it also runs the risk of surveillance. But if we continue, regardless of the surveillance comment, if we continue that now that we have a digital identity, India does, many other countries do, how do we translate that digital identity into representation, right? Otherwise, it's like a one-way kind of a street. So anyway, I think my main point here is that we should do I don't want to call it a survey, but I don't think there's a good grasp of looking at this spectrum of digital platforms all the way from, you know, a cell phone and a person going into a city council to the other extreme of algorithms and these other grassroots efforts in between. And I think that'll give us a little bit more maturity on what we mean by representation and which countries in different sandboxes are looking at where in the spectrum, you know, a particular culture and country can intercept. So anyway, thanks for staying on. So I just wanted to slip that in.
It's very good.
I didn't get a chance earlier. So
I think the issue of identity is the most fundamental, and and so we have to work out an approach to it. And it's not magic, and no one person in the world has the answer. But my commitment is that between us all, we can morph our way to a better sense of how to use identity. But it will take time.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much. Thanks for staying on.
You're welcome.
Hi, Malin. I just quickly wanted to mention that for digital transformation regulation and the SDGs, a lot of the work that we are trying to do both with Inclusive Sustainable Smart Cities and Anchor Union could be of value. Just let me know. We have a call tomorrow, so we can talk about it further.
Thank you. Thanks for the reminder, Ashlyn. If there's no other comments, I'm happy to let you all go. If anybody wants to say anything more, please say it now or forever hold your peace. Well, I want to thank everyone, each one of you for your input. And I know our sessions are going to be better because of this. Thank you all. Bye-bye.